Anime, am I actually the strongest? In this first episode, we are introduced to a man who has isolated himself in his house for 5 years since junior high school. He did this to avoid bullying. One day, his phone shines brightly, and when he regains consciousness, he is greeted by a goddess. The goddess tells him that he has been chosen to be reincarnated. He will live in a world full of magic. Because of that, the goddess gives him cheats so that his life won't be difficult. The man agrees to be reincarnated. He wants to live a peaceful life. To relax all day without thinking about anything and live lazily, then suddenly fall asleep. When he wakes up in the other world, he realizes that he is in the body of a newborn baby. He still retains memories from his previous life. His father is a king of a kingdom, and his mother, known as the Lightning Princess, once defeated the Demon King. The baby has the mark of the king on his left chest. They are very proud of their child. After that, they want to measure the baby's magical energy. The king has high expectations because the child is the offspring of the Lightning Princess. A number appears on the magic measuring crystal, and they are shocked because the baby's magical energy is only level 2. Furthermore, the baby doesn't have any attributes and can only master defensive magic. Both parents are worried that their reputation will be ruined when the people find out about their child's existence. They decide to spread a rumor that the newborn Prince Reinhardt was actually born stillborn. The king orders his servants to throw Reinhardt deep into the forest. The goddess who reincarnated him panics when she sees this. She forgot that the magic energy measuring device in that world can only display up to 2 digits. Moreover, she forgot to add attributes to him. In fact, the goddess had given him a cheat so that his magical energy level was 1002. Reinhardt is currently alone in the forest. He cannot move freely because he is still a baby. He wants to try magic since he was told earlier that he could use defensive magic. He imagines it and easily creates a cube-shaped shield. He can enlarge and change the color of the shield. It seems like he can create anything just by imagining it. After trying it, he realizes that his defensive magic can be used on himself. Reinhardt appears as if he is floating, even though there is a shield carrying him. Soon, a giant red fox ambushes Reinhardt. Luckily, his shield is sturdy enough to withstand the fox's bite. He creates many small shields to attack the fox. However, his attacks have little effect. Then, he comes up with the idea of lifting the trees around him with his shield. Finally, his attacks have an impact on the fox. Unfortunately, that was still not enough to defeat it. Reinhardt decided to fly the large trees along with the earth beneath them. When the fox saw this, it suddenly spoke and said that it wanted to surrender. Reinhardt thought that the voice was just his imagination. The fox pleaded once again to surrender. Reinhardt finally realized that the voice was coming from the fox. He stopped his attack. The fox then explained that it wanted to eat Reinhardt to restore its magical energy. It never expected that a baby could be this strong. Reinhardt wanted to say something, but he couldn't form coherent sentences because he was still a baby. He had the idea to create a shield that could transform his thoughts into words. He attached the shield to his throat. And indeed, he could now speak normally. Feeling that his name was too long and difficult to pronounce, he introduced himself as Hart. He explained that he was abandoned after birth because his magical energy was too low. The fox couldn't believe that he was discarded just like that. After all, the fox sensed magical energy within Hart that surpassed that of humans. The fox suspected that Hart was the reincarnation of the Demon King. Hart admitted this because he didn't want to be seen as a loser. Moreover, he used to be an unemployed shut-in. The fox immediately believed him. The fox offered itself to be killed because it had lost the fight. Hart felt uncomfortable with the idea of killing it. He forgave the fox as long as it wouldn't attack him again in the future. The fox vowed to keep that promise in the name of the Flame Fenrir race. Finding the name of the race cumbersome, Hart called the fox Flay. Hart asked for permission to leave now that their problem was resolved. However, Flay didn't want to say goodbye first. Hart had saved it and even given it a new name. When that happened, a contract was formed. Therefore, it was only fitting for a servant to dedicate itself to its master. While Flay was still talking, Hart suddenly felt weak and couldn't fly with his shield anymore. It seemed that this problem wouldn't be solved with magic alone. Indeed, Hart needed breast milk. For the sake of his master, Flay would do its best. It began to transform into a human. However, Flay still couldn't produce breast milk. It needed to go through the reproductive process first. They were still helpless and couldn't do anything. At that moment, Flay sensed someone approaching. Heart commanded Flay to check on the person, and Heart created a shield that allowed them to communicate privately over a distance. When asked, the man who came said that he wanted to pick up the baby behind Flay. Flay immediately refused. It didn't want to hand over Heart, who had just become its master. However, the man said that the baby was his relative. He knew that the baby was abandoned for a reason, so he came to save it. Furthermore, Heart looked hungry. The man had brought breast milk in a bag for the baby. Heart asked Flay to retrieve the breast milk. However, Flay insisted on maintaining its dignity by taking care of Heart alone. The man revealed that he couldn't bear to see a young child in distress. When his ex-wife was pregnant, their baby didn't cry when it was born. That's why he wanted Heart to continue living after birth. The man then persuaded Flay with a deal. If Flay wanted Heart to be its master, Flay had to work as the man's servant. After hearing the story and agreement from the man, Flay finally agreed. Then, the man destroyed Heart's baby basket and replaced the cloth that Heart was wrapped in. This was done to create camouflage. 9 years have passed, and now Heart is accustomed to living with his new family. The man who picked him up turned out to be a count named Gordo. Gordo has a daughter from his new wife. Her name is Charlotte, commonly known as Char, a young blonde girl. It seems that Char is not very fond of interacting with Heart. On the other hand, Char seems to be very fond of Flay. However, Flay still prioritizes Heart as its servant. In fact, Flay will only play with Char if ordered by Heart first. While the two of them play, Heart watches from a distance. Then, his stepmother, Natalia, approaches him. She knows that Heart is thinking about his relationship with Char. However, according to Natalia, Char avoids Heart because she doesn't know how to behave around someone of the opposite sex who is the same age. That's why Char can be very close to Flay, who is the same gender. Natalia suggests that Heart do something to make Char happy. Perhaps Char's perception will change if Heart shows his role as an older brother. Despite being asked to do so, Heart was just an unemployed person with communication problems. He felt incapable of undertaking such a difficult task. Afterward, Heart was contemplating his life plan while lying on the bed. Actually, Heart wanted to live independently. However, Flay would surely continue to follow him. Plus, Char might grow to hate him even more. On the other hand, if he continued to live in this residence, Heart would have to do many things. By the way, Heart can now create clones of himself using defensive magic. During these 9 years, he has conducted extensive research on defensive magic. Unfortunately, his clone still cannot speak or move. While still pondering his life issues, Gordo knocks on his door. He invites Heart to teach him sword techniques. Since Heart's magic level is very low, Gordo wants to develop Heart's skills in other areas. They begin training with a wooden sword. In his lifetime, Gordo was known as the Earth Crusher Hammer, a formidable warrior. Since Heart didn't want to feel pain, he covered his body with defensive magic. Heart immediately leaps and swings his sword. Although Gordo can dodge it, he seems surprised by the attack. Moreover, Heart's wooden sword breaks when it touches the ground. Now it's Gordo's turn to attack. As the sword is about to hit him, Heart manages to dodge perfectly by leaping high into the air. In fact, that attack could only be avoided if someone had magic energy at level 30 or higher. Since then, Heart has always been amazed by his abilities. In the past, he even created his own magic level measuring crystal that could measure up to 3 digits. He suspected that maybe his magic level reached 3 digits, but when measured, the result remained the same, 002. Heart immediately gave up when he saw the result. Besides, it was said that the highest magic level in human history was 77. So, Heart felt it was pointless to test it to 4 digits. In his opinion, the cheat he received from the goddess was the ability to use defensive magic with high efficiency. Meanwhile, Char watches Heart's sword training from a distance. In the evening, Gordo tells Natalia about the earlier incident. Char is sleeping on her mother's lap. According to Gordo's opinion, Heart is a newly awakened demon race. Based on the family's secret information, someone in the past had a connection with creatures from the demon race. There is a possibility that Hart was born with those characteristics. It is true that Hart doesn't have horns and a tail, but the royal symbol he possesses remains a mystery. In fact, even Flay, who is a demon race, idolizes Hart. However, Natalia cannot bear to think of Hart as a demon race. Gordo also still considers Hart as a human. He wants to bring happiness to their children. Meanwhile, Flay has been listening to their conversation. It also objects to the idea that its older sibling is a demon race. This is the end of episode 1. Continuing to episode 2, Hart was relaxing on his bed. Lately, Gordo seemed busy, so he didn't need to practice sword techniques. Suddenly, Hart heard a commotion outside. He tried to see the situation outside using his protective magic projection. Near the fortress gate, many of his father's soldiers were severely injured. Gordo himself was fine but felt very frustrated. Hart went there and met his father. Gordo said he had been busy lately because there had been frequent bandit attacks in the area. After obtaining the information, Gordo and his troops headed to the bandits' headquarters. However, their troops were suddenly attacked from behind. Despite being alert and fully prepared, they were taken by surprise. Hart's face turned angry upon hearing Gordo's story. Flay was also there, mocking the soldiers for losing to lowly bandits. Hart immediately told her to be quiet, and Flay backed off. While walking towards his residence, Hart secretly predicted protective magic that could heal wounds. The soldiers were puzzled as to why their injuries healed on their own. That night, Hart was already asleep in his bed, and for some reason, Flay was still standing in front of his room door. When Hart woke up and wanted to leave the room, he was surprised to see Flay there. Even when asked, Flay didn't say anything. Hart remembered that earlier he had ordered Flay to stay quiet because he was angry. Perhaps that's why Flay was acting this way. Hart felt guilty and allowed Flay to speak again. After that, Hart wanted to go out tonight, and he asked Flay to accompany him. Hart used his projection to search for the bandits who attacked his father's soldiers. Hart found a group of bandits, but among them, he saw some soldiers as well. Hart and Flay suspected that the enemy had information about Gordo's troops. In other words, they had spies. Without much thought, Hart decided to eliminate them completely. From inside the residence, Hart and Flay were unaware that Char was looking out the window. Meanwhile, at the bandits' headquarters, it turned out there were indeed some soldiers who had betrayed their own side. They were pleased to see Gordo running away from the battle. Their next plan was to eliminate Gordo. Unbeknownst to them, Hart and Flay overheard their conversation. They panicked because there was a sudden intruder. As they tried to draw their weapons, Hart immobilized them with his protective magic. Hart intended to interrogate them, and it seemed they had no other choice after witnessing his terrifying face and abilities. Hart obtained some interesting information. The bandits who attacked were actually Imperial soldiers from a neighboring country in disguise. They infiltrated the kingdom to create chaos. They claimed to have an accomplice who helped them overcome the border security. However, they themselves didn't know much about this accomplice. Hart was surprised because such a thing could only be done with authority surpassing that of Gordo. It could be that someone in this kingdom was targeting Gordo's life. After answering Hart's questions, the spies pleaded for forgiveness and promised not to be involved in this matter again. However, Hart instructed Flay to burn down their entire headquarters instead. And so, the fortress they used as their base turned into a sea of fire. For now, Hart planned to inform Gordo about this information through an anonymous letter. The next day, Gordo received the anonymous letter. Gordo's troops confirmed that the mentioned fortress had been completely burned down, and they also managed to capture some bandits at the location. Initially, Gordo suspected that they were not ordinary bandits, but he didn't expect them to be involved with the Empire. Char was also with Gordo and heard all the news. Char asked who had exterminated those wicked people. It was not certain, but considering the skill and brutality displayed, only one person came to mind when it came to discussing powerful fire magic. Who else but Flay? Gordo even admitted that Flay had abilities surpassing his own. Sometimes, Flay also patrolled to control the demon race in this area. Gordo speculated that Flay coincidentally encountered the bandits while on patrol. Char immediately remembered something and asked for permission to leave. Char wanted to find out more about her sibling. She went straight to Flay to inquire. She wanted to know if there were two of her siblings. Char recounted that last night she saw shadows that looked like Hart and Flay flying in the middle of the night. However, Char was certain that her sibling couldn't use flying magic. Therefore, Char decided to go to her sibling's room to make sure. There, she found her sibling sleeping, but Char didn't sense the usual frightening aura. Flay instantly felt proud of her master's power. She explained that the intimidating aura was evidence of Hart's extraordinary magical strength. Since infancy, his power had been incredibly formidable. Even as a demon, Flay couldn't reach that level. Char then asked about Hart's true identity. However, Flay didn't want to tell her. Although when Hart once claimed to be the Demon King, he was just speaking casually at that time. In the afternoon, Flay told Hart about her conversation with Char. They spoke telepathically using protective magic to avoid being overheard by others. Hart decided to create a surveillance spell. He also set it up to emit a warning sound whenever Char was in a certain location or engaged in something dangerous. At night, Hart intentionally left his room to lure Char. He pretended to go to the bathroom. Char followed Hart from behind at a not too distant distance. Then, Hart gathered his courage to turn around and ask her something. Char immediately ran and hid again. Even while bathing, Hart didn't suspect that his sister was secretly spying on him, although in reality, Char was clearly visible. The following day was the same. Char continued to follow and observe Hart from behind. Even when he practiced swordsmanship, read books, bathed with Gordo, and during all his other activities. This went on for 7 days. Then, during a family meal, Gordo informed them that Natalia and Char would be going out. They were going to attend an annual festival. Usually, Gordo would accompany them, but this time he asked the two of them to go instead. Meanwhile, Char continued to gaze at Hart. In the afternoon, Hart received a warning sound from the surveillance spell he had placed on Char. In the forest, Natalia and Char were ambushed by a group of bandits. The guards were overwhelmed trying to fend off the bandits. Natalia managed to find an opportunity to escape. She carried Char with her. Suddenly, a protective magic appeared in Char's ear, indicating the direction to flee. Natalia herself was puzzled about how someone could give instructions to Char. Natalia reached the edge of a cliff, and Char said there was a hiding place below. Reluctantly, Natalia had to jump down to avoid being captured by the bandits. Fortunately, Natalia used her magic to minimize the impact of the fall. They finally arrived in a dark cave. Natalia said she wanted to meet the person who had given Char instructions. Although she didn't know the person's identity, Natalia believed they were a defender of truth. Char asked what a defender of truth was. Natalia explained that this figure was someone who punished criminals. Natalia intended to go outside and told Char to stay there. As she left, the mouth of the hiding place suddenly vanished and turned into a stone. However, she could still pass through the stone. It seemed to be an illusion spell. Unaware that the bandits had managed to find her, Natalia was not going to allow herself to become their captive. She unsheathed the knife she had and aimed it at her own throat. She felt it was better to die than to be a prisoner. Suddenly, the knife Natalia held shattered into pieces. It was actually Hart's doing. He also made Natalia temporarily unconscious to prevent her from being discovered. Witnessing all of this, Hart became incredibly angry. He unleashed his wrath upon all the bandits in front of him. After successfully securing their mother, Hart brought her inside the cave. He altered his voice to sound like someone else, but Char couldn't be fooled. She felt the intimidating aura emanating from him, similar to Hart's aura. Char gathered the courage to turn around and call out to her brother. Surprisingly, Hart spontaneously responded when she called out to him. Char asked if he was the defender of truth who punished evil people. Hart didn't know how to answer, so he went along with it for now. He confessed that he was indeed a defender of truth. Char became excited upon hearing this and felt guilty for misunderstanding her brother all this time. Hart only asked her to keep it a secret for now. After that, Hart bid farewell and went outside to take care of the remaining enemies. Later that night, Hart returned home early and instructed Flay to pick up Natalia and Char, so they wouldn't suspect that he was the one who saved them. Gordo's subordinates also reported that the injured guards miraculously healed themselves. Just like the other day, Gordo wanted to express his gratitude to the person who helped him, but he had no idea about their identity. Hart mentioned that the person would surely come again when the Imperial soldiers disguised as bandits returned. Gordo immediately asked how Hart knew that the bandits were actually Imperial soldiers. Hart made up a reason, saying that it was the most likely scenario if they were targeting Natalia and Char. A while later, Flay returned with Natalia and Char. Unexpectedly, Char suddenly hugged Hart with joy. Gordo and Natalia were also surprised to see them becoming close all of a sudden. Char simply stated that she had fallen in love with her brother. Flay felt jealous seeing someone else getting close to Hart. This is the end of episode 2. Continuing to episode 3, Char casually entered Hart's room and invited him to play. Hart asked her to knock on the door next time she wanted to come in. Char happily agreed and hugged her older brother. Since that day, Charlotte played in Hart's room every day. Hart didn't mind at all. In fact, he felt comforted by being able to caress Char, who was like a small animal. Char was curious about the visible projection in Hart's room. Hart explained that it was magic for surveillance. Char immediately referred to it as ancient magic because a while ago Hart mentioned that he was researching ancient magic in his room. Hart pretended to say that this magic was a bit troublesome because there was no documentation on ancient magic. However, to his surprise, Char said that there was actually documentation. She had seen it in the castle library. When they arrived at the library, Hart was very impressed with the number of books there, especially since it was his first time coming here. After that, Char fetched a book about ancient magic that she had seen. In one of the books, it was explained that ancient magic was non-elemental magic. Modern magic complements it by adding 4 elements. Hart suspected that perhaps his protective magic had similarities to ancient magic. Although there were many explanations about ancient magic, according to Char, this book was the most interesting among all. Hart didn't expect that Char had read this book, even though there were many difficult vocabulary words in it. Apparently, she read it with the help of her mother and Flay. Suddenly, Char sat on Hart's lap. She said that her mother and Flay also held her while reading the book. When reading the book more deeply, she felt that the development of the story was similar to an anime. Char became curious about the anime that her brother mentioned. Hart found it difficult to explain all the details, but in essence, anime is a moving picture, even with sound. Thanks to Hart's explanation, Char became interested in anime and wanted to watch it too. Honestly, Hart also wanted to see it, but he didn't know how. However, when he saw Char so excited, he tried to find a way for them to watch anime. 2 weeks later, the plan succeeded. The explanation was too complicated, but the important thing was that Hart could now access modern Japanese internet connection. Even the streaming subscription he bought before was still active. Hart just needed to create a special account for children so that Char could watch. After that, Char looked at the list of available anime and immediately became interested in an anime titled Emotional. From the thumbnail, the anime depicted a cute magical girl. As the anime played, Char was truly captivated by the moving and sound-filled images. However, Char encountered one problem. She couldn't understand the character's speech. Well, it was understandable because it was in Japanese. Char pleaded to be taught the Japanese language. Hart felt that it would be difficult, but he believed that Char had good absorption abilities since she was only 5 years old. And indeed, Char quickly mastered hiragana and katakana within 2 hours. She even started learning kanji for elementary school level and typed them into the search engine. 2 weeks later, as usual, Char entered Hart's room. This time, she wanted to watch the continuation of Tama-zan. Char loved the story. The zombies were taking over Saitama City, and the Justice Heroes would protect the citizens. For the past 2 weeks, Char had been learning Japanese from anime and had grasped the basics. It was truly amazing, but Hart couldn't let her sister watch anime all the time. Just when Char wanted to watch the next episode, Hart advised her that binge-watching an entire season was not good. From now on, Hart limited Char to only watch 3 hours a day. Char was naturally disappointed. Despite that, Hart had to remain firm. He then invited Char to go out for dinner. During dinner, Char appeared sleepy and didn't eat her food at all. Gordo became curious because lately Char had been spending a lot of time with Hart. Char suddenly snapped out of her drowsiness and answered that they were studying ancient magic. After finishing dinner, Char continued to follow Hart, hoping to be allowed to watch anime. However, Hart still didn't give in and told her to take a bath and go to bed immediately. While Hart was taking a bath, Char actually entered the bathing area as well. Since she couldn't watch anime, Char had no choice but to go to sleep. By the way, Char had already told her mother that she would be taking a bath with her brother. Hart didn't mind because Char was still a young child, but deep down, he still felt like a criminal. Somehow, Char kept staring at Hart's body. It turned out she was curious about the mark on Hart's left chest. Char believed that it was the symbol of a justice hero. Heart simply pretended to confirm her statement, attributing it to her excessive anime watching. Afterward, they went to sleep and separated from each other. Despite the separation, Char suddenly ended up sleeping next to Heart. It seemed that Natalia had escorted Char as per her request, and she was even peeking from outside. She said her dream would come true by witnessing the closeness between Heart and Char. The next day, Gordo and his troops were about to go out to eliminate the bandits. Char appeared worried seeing her father's departure. She still seemed concerned when in Heart's room. However, Heart assured her that her father would be fine because these bandits were just ordinary ones. Lately, many ordinary people had turned into bandits due to power struggles within the country. Char wondered if there was no way for everyone to live happily. Heart explained that it was very difficult, even though everyone wished for it. Char then asked if her brother couldn't solve this problem. According to Char, Heart's power existed to handle such matters. It was unclear from which anime Char learned that sentence. Heart couldn't bear to see his little sister pleading with such adorable and pitiful eyes. It didn't stop there. Char wanted to see Heart transform before fighting. Reluctantly, Heart complied with her request. He posed as he did in the anime and changed his appearance. Heart wore all black clothing, with a cloak and helmet to conceal his identity. He also modified his voice so that he wouldn't be recognized by others. After that, Heart created a projection so that Char could watch him in action. Moreover, Heart couldn't take Char directly to the scene. After some time, Heart finally found the bandits. He blocked off the cave where they were hiding with protective magic. Upon arriving, Heart released his protective magic. Although embarrassed, Heart posed first before disposing of the bandits. When he had defeated all of them, Gordo and his troops arrived. Gordo asked who the person was that had defeated the bandits. Heart was puzzled about how to respond and accidentally blurted out Madani, still no one. Gordo then asked if this Madani was the one who had saved his wife and child. Heart pretended not to remember the incident, but his goal was clear, to uphold justice. Of course, Heart felt extremely embarrassed when he said it. He immediately flew away from them. When he arrived back in his room, Heart felt like he wanted to die from embarrassment. Because Char wanted to see Heart's actions again, he eventually gave in and continued to do it repeatedly. In fact, he now earned the nickname Black Knight. A few days later, Heart appeared very happy in his room. It turns out he had successfully perfected his clone. Since he was shown references to ancient magic, Heart had been trying to perfect his clone using that information. The clone resembled him so much that Heart himself felt annoyed. With this, his desire to seclude himself in his room was finally realized. Unbeknownst to Heart, Char had actually slept in his room overnight. And when Char woke up, she was clearly confused to see two of her brother. When Flay asked Heart to come out and greet the guests, Heart instructed his clone to go instead. However, because their personalities were too similar, the clone was also too lazy to leave. The guests who came to their residence were Princess Marianne and Prince Lias. They claimed to be heirs to the throne, which possibly made them Heart's siblings. Nevertheless, Prince Lias had a haughty demeanor. Princess Marianne continued to apologize for Lias' behavior. Heart himself was also surprised by his actions. Lias noticed that Heart was glaring at him. He had heard rumors that Heart was a level 2 child adopted from an orphanage. Lias challenged Heart to a duel to teach him proper etiquette towards the royal family. The duel was actually carried out. Since Lias seemed very confident, Heart wanted to see his level. Lias' current level was 9 and could reach a maximum level of 40. At the same time, he also wanted to see Gordo and Marianne's levels. Gordo had reached level 32, while Marianne was at level 14 and could reach a maximum level of 33. When Lias swung his sword, Heart easily dodged it. However, Lias protested because he couldn't discipline Heart if he kept dodging. Heart followed the course of the game. He covered his body with protective magic and pretended to be in pain when attacked. Lias felt superior and pretended to tell Heart to counterattack. Since he was allowed, Heart quickly moved behind Lias and knocked him down. Marianne, who witnessed it, couldn't believe that Heart was only level 2. Gordo himself didn't know. Even Heart himself said he didn't know how it was possible. Unable to accept it, Lias cast a fireball towards Heart. However, Heart was able to handle it with his protective magic. From the perspective of others, it appeared as though Lias' magic was absorbed by something. Lias tried to cast it again multiple times, but the result remained the same. Afterward, Heart showed all the absorbed flames forming a tremendous blaze. Lias immediately gave up upon seeing it. Then, Marianne apologized for her brother's behavior. She also wanted to confirm if Hart was truly level 2. She just found out that the rumors about him being level 2 had spread throughout the town. She suspected that their biological parents were investigating him. However, Hart didn't believe they were the ones behind it. Besides, his parents had discarded him so easily. This is the end of episode 3. Continuing to episode 4, recently Char enjoys hunting bandits using her magic and instructs Hart to exterminate them. Suddenly, Flay arrives after hearing from Char that Hart often acts alone. It turns out Flay also wants to join in the action. Hearing this, Char becomes excited as she has seen in anime when a comrade comes to save the hero in dangerous situations. Hart feels pressured by Char and Flay to act accordingly. Unable to refuse anymore, he warns Flay not to show extreme scenes to Char before they set off. Upon arrival, the bandits are confused by the sound of people from the forest. Slowly revealing themselves, Hart introduces himself as the Black Knight in a very embarrassing pose. Mimicking her master, Flay introduces herself as the Red Soldier. The bandits are puzzled by their antics. Contrary to their promise, Flay immediately uses her fire magic to brutally attack the bandits. Hart even uses protective magic to shield the bandits from Flay's assault. Seeing her attack has no effect, Flay increases the intensity of her fire. Finally, Hart knocks Flay on the head to stop her from going overboard. He then orders her to go home while he deals with the rest alone. After returning home, Hart collapses from exhaustion after dealing with the stubborn Flay. Char is overjoyed to see both of them in action. Flay is reminded that her attack was blocked by something during the fight. She wants to fight with all her might to help her master. However, Hart doesn't want Flay to participate in action again. Unfortunately, Char also wants to see both of them in action together again. It seems Hart's wish to live as a reclusive unemployed person in his room will not be fulfilled for a while. Meanwhile, Lias is still upset about being humiliated by Hart during their sword duel. Lias heard that Hart is just a level 2 kid. His servant comes to discuss something with him. For tomorrow's inspection, the servant asks him to invite Charlotte. At first, Lias is unwilling to invite the child. However, after the servant firmly insists that it's for his own good, Lias finally agrees. On the other hand, Char returns to Hart's room after the dinner event. Earlier, Hart also attended the event, but it was his clone that went. Char brings luxurious food from the event for Hart. The clone is upset because the real Hart ordered him to attend the event and then enjoy the food without pressure. The clone can't take it anymore. He is always forced to do things he dislikes and immediately collapses after complaining like that. Char is worried about her brother's clone, as he seems to be in a bad state. However, Char still has to participate in the inspection tomorrow. Hart asks why Char is participating in the inspection. Char explains that she was invited by Prince Lias. After seeing his suffering clone, Hart reluctantly decides to carry out his activities on his own for the time being. At night, Hart wants to ensure that tomorrow will be safe if Char joins. He investigates the inspection route using projection magic. During this, he sees a group of robed individuals performing a ritual in the middle of the forest. Innocently, Hart approaches them and asks what they are doing. He mentions that he happened to pass by and will inquire with Count Gordo to confirm their activities. The people immediately mistake Hart for Count Gordo's subordinate and try to eliminate him. Hearing this, Hart suddenly decides not to show mercy to them. As usual, Hart defeats the enemies effortlessly. However, one person summons a group of night skeletons from the magic circle they created. Again, the skeletons prove no match for Hart's abilities. However, the defeated skeletons manage to rise again. Hart realizes that the fight will be endless if he doesn't come up with a plan. After attacking several times, Hart notices something shining within the skeletons, which he suspects to be their core. When the summoner orders the skeletons to attack again, they don't respond to his command. Instead, they turn to attack the summoner and the other robed individuals. Feeling cornered, the summoner calls forth a more powerful creature, a golem. The golem easily crushes the skeletons with its bare hands. Observing closely, Hart notices that the golem also has an object on its chest similar to the skeleton's core. Upon this realization, Hart starts attacking, aiming for the object on the golem's chest. The golem suddenly stops moving and then turns to attack the summoner, just like what happened with the skeletons. In fact, Hart was only trying to immobilize it with a protective magic spike, but it seems there was an unintended alteration in the spell. After that, Hart binds the robed individuals with the help of the skeleton army. He wants to interrogate their leader. When questioned, the leader refuses to answer any of Hart's questions. Hart suspects this is because he acted too familiar. Feeling insecure about his lack of social skills, Hart decides to bury the leader's subordinates alive if he doesn't want to talk. Unable to watch this, the leader finally reveals his identity. They are the Summoning Corps under direct command of the Queen. They plan to attack the convoy that will conduct the field inspection tomorrow using summoned creatures. Hart is taken aback. The Queen they refer to is, of course, the Queen of this country, his birth mother. In other words, their target is Charlotte Xenophus. Char is targeted because her talent is seen as surpassing the Queen's potential. If Gordo supports Char, the Queen fears that the kingdom will be divided. Previously, the Queen also attempted to involve the Imperial troops from the neighboring country in her plans. However, having failed twice, the forces directly under the Queen's command, like the Summoning Corps, are now in charge. Hart is shocked to learn these surprising facts. It turns out that all this time, the Imperial troops disguised as bandits to attack Gordo, Natalia, and Char were the Queen's doing. Hart starts to despise the Queen, especially since she abandoned him since birth. He will not forgive anyone who tries to harm the people he cares about, even if it's his own birth mother. The next day, Hart is on his way to the joint inspection with the others. Laius looks unhappy since earlier. Then, Char tells him that he doesn't need to be sad for losing to Hart because he never had a chance to win from the beginning. Instead, he should be proud of attempting a one-on-one fight. Marianne also adds to Char's encouragement. When Hart himself tries to calm Laius, it only makes Laius more irritated with Hart. Laius wonders why since Hart didn't use magic when using his sword. Hart casually replies that he just imagines himself being stronger. However, Hart finds it strange when Laius and Marianne seem surprised. After all, Gordo and the others were satisfied with his explanation. Based on Hart's explanation, Laius suspects that Hart is a risen demon. The term is used for descendants of a union between a demon and a human, sometimes exhibiting characteristics of the demon race. Risen demons do have extraordinary strength, but since Hart doesn't display demon-like features, Marianne doubts this conclusion. A little while later, they finally arrive at the inspection location. It's the first time Hart has seen a wheat field. Charlotte is so excited that she runs around the field. While Gordo is inspecting on his own, Hart approaches him to discuss something. Since Hart rarely approaches Gordo, he knows it must be something important. Then, Hart asks for Gordo's opinion if it turns out that the Queen is targeting Char's life. Coincidentally, last night Gordo received another letter from the Black Knight. According to the letter, Gordo and his troops went to the specified location and found the Queen's wizard lying there. Gordo had suspected that the Queen would be hostile towards him. However, he didn't expect her to target Char. Nevertheless, she is the Queen of this country, and they can't just interfere with her as they please. Hart wishes such a queen would disappear from the world. Gordo reminds him not to speak recklessly like that. In reality, the capital desperately needs the Queen right now. Despite the irony, the authority of the king has been long gone. Many nobles have been vying for the next throne. However, they haven't made a move so far because of the Queen's absolute presence. In other words, if the Queen were gone, a civil war would break out. Gordo tells a story from 2 years before Hart was born when the king formed an expedition force to defeat the Demon King. Among that force was Giselet, the current queen. Giselet managed to defeat the Demon King all by herself. She became a hero and was dubbed the Princess of Lightning by everyone. Later, with the support of the people, Giselet married the king. Hart never imagined that the queen was such a formidable person. Gordo explains that the situation could change if there's someone who can replace the queen's role. Hart then asks why Gordo doesn't become king himself. Gordo feels he's not talented in politics. However, he has a feeling that Char could do it. Unfortunately, she's still too young. At least, Gordo wants to wait until Char becomes an adult. He's confident that Char will grow into someone who can lead this kingdom. From this conversation, Hart understands that Gordo hopes he will protect Char. He will do it until Char becomes a great queen. With that, Hart can live peacefully and enjoy life as a shut and unemployed person. This is the end of episode 4. Continuing on to episode 5, Giselet's subordinates are facing her due to their failed plans. Giselet appears disappointed by her subordinates' repeated failures. They report that there's a man known as the Black Knight who wiped out a bandit group in Count Gordo's territory. They suspect that he's also the one responsible for decimating the Summoning Corps today. However, Giselet remains unsatisfied with this explanation. Her subordinates request another chance to rectify their mistakes. Nonetheless, Giselet suddenly throws the wine she's been drinking at them. She has given them 3 chances already. After all, she merely tasked them with killing a child. Giselot does acknowledge that Charlotte could become a threat to her in the future. Given the circumstances, Giselot decides to handle it on her own. She plans to wield the holy sword she possesses to defeat the Demon King. Suddenly, Giselot hears a mysterious sound in her throne room. Her subordinates are rendered unconscious with protective magic covering their heads. Of course, the perpetrator is Hart, who is currently disguised as the Black Knight. Giselot believed that her palace would have multiple layers of protection, making it impervious to infiltration. However, to Hart, these protections are nothing more than playthings he can easily break through. Giselot is confident in her ability to defeat him and teach him a lesson for disturbing her. Hart is quite surprised to see Giselot simultaneously invoking 3 magic circles. Firstly, Hart finds himself trapped within a water sphere, making it hard to breathe. Yet, he manages to escape by leaping using the protective layer he crafted on his feet. Secondly, Giselot unleashes a series of ice magic attacks, which Hart manages to deflect with his protective barriers. Finally, Giselot employs an immense fire magic. Hart seems not to dodge or deflect it, choosing to remain still. Following this, Hart is seen kneeling after being struck by her attack. At this point, Giselot believed she had won. However, Hart stood up again as if nothing had happened. In an instant, Hart launched an attack with his protective magic. While Giselot managed to deflect it, she had no idea what had struck her. She could only sense the shockwaves. Seeing that Giselot could still deflect his attack, Hart decided to get more serious. He unleashed a series of stronger consecutive attacks. Giselot struggled to withstand them all. She felt her magical energy would deplete before his. Even though she fought the Demon King, her strength wasn't as formidable as the Black Knight's. Nevertheless, Giselot didn't give up. She eventually drew her holy sword. Despite wielding her holy sword, they still seemed evenly matched. Giselot grew more fervent, declaring herself as the strongest in the world, unmatched in sword combat. Hart considered Giselot too weak for someone claiming to be the world's strongest. Subsequently, Hart swung his sword, causing Giselot's sword to be knocked away. Hart decided to punish Giselot by placing an iron collar around her neck. If the collar is forcibly removed, her neck will be severed. Hart then demanded that Giselot refrain from interfering with Count Gordo and his family again. He threatened her with harsher consequences if she violated this demand. With Giselot dealt with, he left the throne room. Outside, Flay was already waiting for him. Since that day, Giselot never bothered them again. 5 peaceful years have passed, and Hart is now almost 15 years old. In Count Gordo's region, the snow has started to fall. Hart, Char, and Flay are outside playing. Hart asks Flay if she's not feeling cold wearing her maid outfit as her daily attire. This outfit is the first clothing Hart gave her. Flay playfully claims she's not bothered, even though she's actually cold. Well, what can you do? Hart creates winter clothes for Flay to wear. Hart emphasizes that Flay should just let him know if she needs anything. Upon hearing this, Flay takes it quite literally and comes up with 10 requests. Of course, Hart declines. Unexpectedly, Char also has a request. She says she's prepared a finishing move related to the snow. Unfortunately, she can't execute it herself. Naturally, Char asks Hart to do it for her. As usual, Hart feels uneasy turning down Char's request. After being whispered to by Char, Hart starts performing the finishing move. He conjures a snow tornado in his hand, thanks to the assistance of his protective magic. Then, Hart strikes a pose and utters a line like a magician in an anime. He directs the snow tornado into the ground, creating a remarkably large hole. Despite feeling very embarrassed, everything feels worth it when he sees Char's happiness. Suddenly, Gordo and Natalia also arrive at the scene. They're surprised to find such a huge hole near them. Char panics at the thought of Hart's identity being exposed because of this. Then, Hart tries something. Using his protective magic, he creates the illusion of the Black Knight passing by coincidentally. Hart explains that the person wants to showcase his finishing move to them. With a resigned expression, Gordo simply accepts Hart's explanation. After that, Hart asked Gordo if there have been any worrying cases recently. Gordo mentioned that for the past 5 years, no one has targeted Charlotte anymore. He's unsure about what happened to the Queen. Rumor has it that Giselot hasn't appeared in public for several years now. There's speculation that she suddenly started wearing a necklace resembling that of a slave. Initially, people thought it was just the Queen's hobby, but there are also conspiracy theories suggesting that the Queen accidentally put it on and can't take it off. There's also a theory that someone deliberately put it on her. Hart was thankful for his peaceful days without any disturbances. With this, he believed he could live in seclusion wholeheartedly. He decided to head back to his room. However, Gordo suddenly told him that he must attend school in the capital starting from spring. Gordo tried to refuse, but the situation got complicated. He would explain the details later at their residence. Of course, even before anything, Hart rejected the idea. School is the place he despised the most from his previous life. If the situation was indeed complicated and couldn't be refused, Hart intended to break that situation. Upon arriving at their residence, Gordo once again explained that Hart had to attend school in the capital starting from spring. In the past, Hart had refused to attend school in this area. However, this time he couldn't decline simply because he didn't want to. Gordo presented a school recommendation letter directly from the king. Gordo also couldn't comprehend why the king chose Hart, but he suspected it had something to do with Princess Marianne. Since her visit for inspection, it seemed like Marianne had taken an interest in Hart. It was rumored that Laius would skip a grade and also enter that school. Nonetheless, Gordo remained worried. There's a possibility that the queen is planning something and involving Marianne. Given the situation, Hart finally agreed to attend school in the capital. Additionally, Gordo suggested that Hart bring a servant with him. After all, it's difficult to live alone in an unfamiliar place. Unfortunately, he couldn't bring Flay along. Suddenly, Natalia, who had been eavesdropping, volunteered to take care of Hart. The issue is, how can a student attend school with their parents? At least, there's still 3 months until school starts, so Hart can search for a servant by then. Even though he agreed to attend school, Hart still plans to lock himself in his room. He informs his clone about the school news. As his clone cannot use magic, Hart intends to have it expelled for not being proficient at school. In other words, his plan is to make it seem like the king has misjudged Hart's Xenophus. His clone protests why the real Hart himself wouldn't do it. Hart feels he would enjoy using his magic to deal with any troublesome students. The clone immediately starts whining, saying it doesn't want to attend school if it will be bullied by other students and unable to fight back. Seeing it behave this way, Hart decides to bestow his clone with protective magic to prevent it from getting hurt. With a somewhat heavy heart, the clone finally agrees to Hart's plan. Hart is currently at a wooden house beside a lake, a mountain's distance away from Gordo's castle. He built this house over the course of 5 years as his final retreat. There, no one can disturb him. Hart spends his time playing games on a console he built himself. Suddenly, Char, accompanied by Flay, also arrives at the house. Char is dressed in a costume resembling that of a witch girl. Apparently, she came here to watch the anime Mini Love Cure. While watching it, Char can perfectly mimic the poses and lines of the witch girl. Hart thought Char might be getting tired of the anime since she hasn't been coming to his room lately. However, Char seems to be getting even more into it. These past few days, Char has indeed been learning a lot. That's why she's forbidden to go to her brother's room. From an outsider's perspective, Char appears to be quite spoiled towards her brother. The only way for Char to watch the anime is to ask Flay to bring her here. Suddenly, Hart has the idea to use teleportation to arrive directly at this house. He tries to demonstrate his teleportation using a potato. Through one side of his protective magic, Hart inserts the potato until it teleports to the other side of his protective magic. He has mastered it, but he still hasn't tried teleporting living beings. Flay suggests experimenting with his clone. However, for Flay, Hart's clone is something she can take advantage of as much as she wants. Afterward, Hart incorporates teleportation into his protective magic in his room. He instructs his clone to walk through it. But the clone already knows it's being used as a test subject. Suddenly, Flay loses her temper because the clone won't obey. She jumps into the teleportation to drag Hart's clone into it. As can be seen, his protective magic teleportation can be used on living beings. Next, Hart creates a door that, when opened, will pass through his teleportation. Hart suddenly remembers something: he needs to find a servant. But as usual, he'll procrastinate it. This is the end of episode 5.
Hart is still lounging in his wooden house with Char and Flay. Then he suddenly remembers that he needs to find a butler to accompany him to school. Char and Flay are puzzled as they witness Hart suddenly shouting "Butler." Hart offers the excuse that he wants to take a walk. School is still 3 months away, but Hart has yet to find a suitable candidate. While walking through the forest, Hart recalls a path leading to a certain place. As he follows it, he comes across a village inhabited by many living skeletons. The skeletons notice Hart's arrival and immediately gather to kneel before him, addressing him as their lord. Hart remembers that these skeletons are creatures summoned by the Summoning Corps, which he defeated 5 years ago. For some reason, they have been following Hart ever since. Finally, Hart grants them land, and they decide to settle here and establish a civilization. One skeleton wearing a green robe emerges as their leader, named Johnny. By the way, Hart is curious about one thing in this village. He inquires why there are other monsters here. Johnny explains that they are wild monsters gathered by Flay from this region. They each live in their respective territories and obey Johnny's orders. Upon reflection, Hart doesn't recall the village being this extensive. However, he doesn't mind if the monsters want to live prosperously here. While Hart is here, Johnny wants to show him around the other areas. Hart is taken to the place where they grow food crops. Over the course of a year, they adjust their crops according to the seasons and process what can be stored for an extended period. However, Hart is certain that the skeletons can't consume these food items. So it seems like all these crops are for the monsters. Afterward, Johnny continues to explain various things happening in the village. Hart enjoys observing Johnny's gentle personality and attentiveness. Other creatures are obedient to him, and he remains loyal to Hart. Johnny also carries himself with politeness. If his body had flesh and skin, he might appear like an ordinary human. In fact, Hart considers Johnny as a potential ideal butler he's been searching for. Unfortunately, Johnny can be quite talkative. Once he starts talking, he won't stop. Hart feels he wouldn't be able to handle hearing his chatter every day. Nonetheless, he genuinely cares about Johnny. Johnny notices that Hart's expression seems a bit downcast and asks if there's something he doesn't like. However, Hart avoids the question by praising Johnny. Afterward, Johnny wanted to take Hart to another place. However, Hart said he had some business to attend to, so he couldn't go just yet. The day had turned late, and Hart felt tired from the tour with Johnny. This forest was supposed to be his place of solitude, but now it had become a residence for monsters. Suddenly, Hart felt a strong jolt from behind. The sound came from a one-eyed golem also summoned by the Summoning Corps. Her name was Jigen. Jigen sat down next to Hart in contemplation. Suddenly, Jigen handed a flower to Hart. Hart was surprised to hear Jigen's voice, which turned out to be that of a girl. Despite her appearance, her personality was rather quiet. She didn't cause any trouble, making her suitable to be a servant. The issue was her massive size. If he recalled correctly, Jigen always seemed to be alone. Hart then asked if Jigen was bored in the village. With a hint of shyness, Jigen replied that she liked it. However, what Jigen meant was that she liked Hart. After all that, Hart still hadn't found a suitable butler candidate. He decided to return to his wooden house for now. There, Flay had been waiting for his return. She was still curious why Hart had shouted butler earlier that morning. Upon reflection, it seemed better to ask Flay to be his butler. Unfortunately, her father didn't allow it. The next day, Char approached Hart and told him she had thought of a suitable name for the Black Knight. With a proud demeanor, Char revealed the name to be Schwarzer Krieger. She mentioned that she had found the name on the internet. In a certain country, that name belonged to the god of destruction and creation. On that same day, Flay invited Char to visit the village of skeletons and monsters. Just like before, Char came up with a name for the village as well. Char proposed the name Pandemonium. Without knowing its meaning, Johnny gladly accepted the name. On the other hand, we are shown a group of adventurers who are currently hunting a blue dragon in a snowy region. According to the heroes, this dragon is known as the Blizzard Dragon, and it's quite large for its kind. They stand to earn a significant amount of money if they manage to defeat it. However, the dragon manages to escape amidst a heavy snowstorm. The dragon inadvertently collides with a snow-covered mountain and triggers an avalanche. Information about this incident reaches Gordo, who then informs Hart about it. The dragon flew from the Imperial territory and crashed before crossing the border into our region. While the dragon didn't enter our territory, there's a possibility it might awaken and sneak in. It seems the dragon is wounded due to being pursued by adventurers from the Empire. Gordo doesn't want the dragon to go on a rampage, so he wants Flay, who is of the same demon race, to assess the situation. Flay immediately declines, stating that she only takes orders from Hart. Without hesitation, Hart makes it an order. Despite this, for some reason, Flay still appears upset. Flay goes on to explain that a dragon of that size must have existed for a long time. However, Flay has never seen a blue dragon during the demon race's battles against humans, so she doesn't want to help a cowardly dragon that fled from a fight. Hart then asks Gordo to be given some time to think it over. As he leaves the room, Hart realizes that Char had been eavesdropping on their conversation. Char apologizes for eavesdropping but expresses her desire to help the blue dragon. After being pressed by both Char and Hart, Flay has no choice but to agree to it. After that, Hart and Flay headed to the snowy area where the dragon was spotted. Hart used his projection to search in all directions. It didn't take him long to locate the dragon. Not only that, Flay also spotted a group of adventurers who were about to arrive at the dragon's location. They both hurried over. Fortunately, they arrived just in time. They got there just as the adventurers were about to launch an attack. Hart immediately cast a healing spell on the dragon. Meanwhile, Flay seemed eager to finish off the adventurers. If Hart hadn't protected them, they might have been incinerated by Flay. After the adventurers surrendered, the dragon finally stood up. Hart introduced himself as the Black Knight, but for some reason the dragon exhaled breath that froze Hart. Of course, Flay scolded the dragon for being disrespectful to her master. Fortunately, Hart managed to thaw himself out from the ice. He also got angry even though he had just saved the dragon, but was treated rudely. At that moment, Hart heard the dragon's voice directly in his head, just like with Flay before. The dragon continued to gaze at Flay and asked why Damonken seemed to obey human. Flay immediately enthusiastically recounted their meeting from the beginning until now. Flay ended up narrating for a whole hour. With that, the dragon finally understood how remarkable Hart was. It never imagined that the Demon King had been reincarnated. Hart himself had just remembered that he had once claimed to be the Demon King. The dragon apologized for not participating in the war back then. It didn't like violence, so it had been living alone on a mountain for 300 years to avoid encountering others. Hart was fascinated to hear that it could isolate itself for such an extended period and wanted to know more details. Initially, the dragon spent its time in silence inside a cave. However, one day, an adventurer camped there and accidentally left his book behind. The dragon read that book repeatedly until it became tattered. Over time, it developed a strong desire to read more books. The dragon eventually mustered the courage to leave the cave and head to the nearest town. It assumed a human form and went to a library. Occasionally, it visited the town to bring back books. The dragon repeated this activity to broaden its knowledge. However, it all came to an end when it was discovered by adventurers. All the books it had collected were burned to ashes, and the dragon was forced to leave its cave. After hearing its story, Flay felt sorry for it. Suddenly, she acknowledged the dragon as her sibling. Flay also allowed it to enter Pandemonium. Hart, who was hearing the name for the first time, was confused. Flay then explained that it was the name of Hart's territory, named by Char. The dragon felt delighted to be accepted. Then, as the Blizzard Dragon, it recognized Hart as its master. For some reason, Hart had a hunch that the dragon would transform into a naked human form. After all, he had already experienced it when he met Flay. As the dragon transformed, Hart covered it with a protective spell that instantly turned into a servant's attire. Finally, Hart removed his mask to introduce his true identity, Hart Zenfis, the son of a count who ruled the border region nearby. Hart wanted to know the dragon's name, but it seemed like it didn't have one. The dragon then entrusted its name to Hart. Since it was the Blizzard Dragon, Hart named it Lisa. Afterward, Hart took flight and asked both of them to follow him. Lisa could still use its wings in human form, so it had no trouble keeping up with Hart. Meanwhile, Flay had to run as fast as she could to follow Hart from below.
Hart introduced Lisa to Gordo, Natalia, and Char. Hart said that Lisa wanted to become a servant in the mansion, and they all welcomed her warmly. However, Gordo didn't expect the young girl to be the Blizzard Dragon, and he was even more surprised that she was obedient to Hart. Afterward, Flay guided Lisa around the mansion and explained the duties of a servant. First, they went to the courtyard to sweep it. When Flay tried to demonstrate how to sweep, she ended up twisting the broom until it broke. She then claimed that her previous attempt was incorrect. To everyone's surprise, Lisa was able to sweep the courtyard clean without any issues. Next, they moved on to washing dishes. Every time Flay wiped a dish, she accidentally broke it because she unconsciously applied too much force. Meanwhile, Lisa managed to do it normally. After that, they proceeded to cook. When Flay attempted to cook, the pot she used produced a massive flame. As a result, her food ended up burnt. As usual, Lisa performed well under the guidance of a human servant. She even received compliments from the other servants. Subsequently, Gordo and Natalia were also impressed when they tasted Lisa's cooking. They praised her quick learning abilities. Natalia then asked if Lisa had skills in other areas as well, to which Lisa replied that she had a basic knowledge of magic because she enjoyed reading books about it. Upon hearing this, Natalia immediately suggested that Lisa become Charlotte's personal servant. In the meantime, Flay had been sulking in the corner, feeling inadequate compared to Lisa. The next day, Lisa performed her first task as Charlotte's personal servant, which was to wake her up in the morning. Afterward, Lisa taught Charlotte some fundamental magic. Right from the start, Charlotte was able to conjure a small fireball. Then, Lisa helped Charlotte with her homework, read books together in the library, took baths together, and more. The following day, Hart came across Charlotte practicing magic with Lisa. Charlotte had already learned to create a fireball larger than her own body, while Lisa was inexplicably using water magic. She mentioned that she was using it to do laundry. Lisa was able to teach Charlotte while simultaneously completing her own tasks, displaying remarkable efficiency. Lisa and Charlotte appeared to be very close to each other. Hart was also impressed by Lisa. She was diligent, eager to learn, and quick to adapt. After some contemplation, he realized that Lisa was the ideal servant he had been searching for all along. However, he couldn't bear to take Lisa away from her newfound friendship with Charlotte. It was a pity because he had the perfect candidate right in front of him. Nevertheless, Hart suddenly had an idea. He would install a teleportation door so that Lisa could serve him in the capital and return to the castle directly. In Hart's wooden house, Char looked downcast because her favorite anime, Love Cure, had just ended. For now, Char had nothing to watch. Hart mentioned that there would be a new series next week. Shortly after, Lisa reminded them that Char's break time was almost over. Before Char left, Hart suddenly remembered that he hadn't mentioned that he would be going to school in the capital starting next week. Char was genuinely surprised by this news. In Char's imagination, a school involved an unofficial student council, terrorists, and magical duels. She had, of course, acquired this knowledge from anime. She then asked Lisa to gather the other knights promptly, as she wanted to hold a special roundtable meeting. The knights she referred to were Flay, Johnny, Gigon, and Lisa herself. In this meeting, Char wanted to discuss her brother going to school in the capital next week. This was the first time Flay had heard of this information, and she was annoyed that Hart hadn't informed her beforehand. However, Char stated that Hart must have had a reason for choosing the timing and people to share this information with. Despite that, Flay disagreed with Hart going to be educated by a bunch of humans because he was a demon lord. But before she could voice this, Johnny interrupted her, advising her not to bring up the demon lord topic. Char felt like she had missed out on some valuable information. Moreover, it seemed that only those present at the meeting were aware of it. Johnny tried to console Char, reminding her that her position was much higher than everyone else there, and he believed that Hart would eventually inform Char personally. Returning to the main issue, Char was curious why Hart suddenly wanted to go to school. In the past, Char had asked about school when she watched school-themed anime, and Hart had described it as a terrifying and dangerous place. The others in the room were surprised that Hart could be afraid of something. From this, Char made an assumption based on her anime knowledge. In a school, there was usually an unofficial student council that forced well-behaved students to commit crimes. Then they engaged in magical duels with the rebels, revealing their true identity as a criminal organization capable of shaking the entire country. Char believed that Hart was going to confront them. After all, only someone as powerful as Hart could take on an evil organization behind the nation. Char was also convinced that Hart would install a teleportation door in the capital. This way, Flay, Lisa, and Char herself would go to the capital to gather information. Meanwhile, Johnny and Gigon would prepare and strengthen Pandemonium. However, Lisa had doubts about whether they should act without discussing it with Hart first. Char insisted that they shouldn't make Hart worry. Flay, Johnny, and Dagon also had their own principles to uphold. And when night fell, it turned out that Lisa had disclosed everything that had happened earlier in the day to Hart. He expressed his gratitude to Lisa, wondering what might have happened if she hadn't reported to him. Lisa then asked if Hart was truly battling a massive criminal organization. Hart couldn't believe that Lisa took Char's words seriously. He had to provide a reasonable explanation that wouldn't hurt her feelings. So Hart pretended to admit that he was indeed fighting against the organization. However, he suddenly made one request. He wanted Lisa to accompany him to the capital as his servant. He claimed that this mission could only be entrusted to Lisa. With this, Hart finally convinced Lisa to join him. Hart would carry out his plan to get expelled from school as soon as possible, then pretend to have defeated the criminal organization with the help of Char and the others. The next day, during the servant break time, one servant mentioned that her boyfriend had promised to marry her after the war ended. However, in reality, she had been waiting for 2 years. Flay suggested she should just cut it off. However, Flay's idea of cutting off didn't refer to relationships, but rather literally cutting off their heads. Another servant mentioned that her husband was cheating on her. There was also a servant who was frequently teased by the head servant, and so on. Flay suggested cutting off all of them. Out in the courtyard, Char was curious why Flay's maid uniform was different from the others. Initially, Hart had given Flay an extremely tight-fitting rider suit. The servants requested Flay to change into something more appropriate. However, the provided uniforms didn't fit her, especially around the chest area. Even the largest servant uniform they had didn't fit her bust. Eventually, they had to create a special servant uniform specifically for Flay. After that, Char became envious watching Lisa freely flying around. She wanted to know if Flay could fly as well. With confidence, Flay claimed she could. Char also wanted to learn to fly, so she asked Flay to teach her. However, what Flay did was not flying, she merely jumped very high and far repeatedly. Hart, who was observing from a distance through a projection, was utterly baffled by Flay's behavior. Later, Natalia arrived and scolded Char for wanting to learn flying magic. Char sulked at Flay after the scolding. Flay hurriedly went to Hart to find a solution. Hart, who had been observing everything from afar, understood the situation. He created flying contraptions for Char to ride. Natalia was astounded by the strange devices that allowed Char to fly. Hart felt satisfied that he could make his sister happy again. After having a satisfying flight, Char instructed Flay to go take a bath at the castle since she had gotten dirty from her jumping and wandering the woods. However, instead of going to the castle, Char jumped into a river and bathed there like an animal. As a result, her clothes became completely soaked. She dried her clothes by shaking her body, splashing water onto Hart and Char. Afterward, they returned and coincidentally met Lisa, who was sweeping. Hart was curious about what Lisa had been doing all day when she used to isolate herself. Lisa recollected her routine. She woke up in the afternoon, continued reading the unfinished book from yesterday, fell asleep in the evening, woke up again at night to read, and finally fell asleep once more. Hearing this, Hart was truly impressed with her ideal lifestyle. Because her days were so repetitive, Lisa hadn't realized that 10 years had passed when she returned the book. She could only eat once a week. In Hart's eyes, Lisa was a recluse expert. In the evening at the wooden house, Lisa wanted to ask Hart something. She was still curious about how Hart's teleportation door worked. However, Hart explained that he had simply connected two protectors. Naturally, this answer did not satisfy Lisa. Teleportation magic involving space and time was high-level magic that couldn't be done alone. From Lisa's explanation, Hart assumed that the magic he used wasn't space and time teleportation because it didn't consume much magic energy. Instead, Lisa believed Hart was using magic not from this world. Later that night, Hart gathered Flay, Char, and Lisa. He had created a magic level measuring device and wanted to measure their levels. The results were as follows. Flay was level 40 out of a maximum of 77, Lisa was level 36 out of a maximum of 71, and Char was level 17 out of a maximum of 61. Char's maximum level was even higher than that of the Queen. Since they were inquiring about their magic levels, they became curious about Hart's magic level as well. He still believed he was only at level 2, so he kept it a secret. The day arrived when Hart had to depart for the capital. At this moment, the others were accompanying Hart and Lisa. To conceal Lisa's identity, Hart used his magic to hide her horns and tail. Consequently, Lisa appeared anxious since she wasn't accustomed to this. Meanwhile, Flay was feeling down because she hadn't been chosen to accompany Hart to the capital. In the capital, Marianne joyfully went to meet Laius to deliver a letter from Count Gordo. Laius was certain that the letter must contain news about Hart's departure to the capital. Laius felt that Marianne didn't need to report everything about it. Nevertheless, Marianne knew that Laius had put in a lot of effort to secure a recommendation letter for Hart. Indeed, she had done all of that because she was curious about the power that Hart possessed. Since their battle, Laius had been continually improving his magic and swordsmanship skills. However, the more he trained, the more he felt that the gap between them was vast. That's why, if he and Hart attended the same school, he believed he would understand the reason up close. But it wasn't just Laius. Marianne also urged the king to provide Hart with a recommendation letter. Rumor had it that Marianne was throwing a tantrum and refusing to leave her room until Hart received the recommendation letter. Marianne was certainly surprised to learn that Laius knew about this. It turned out that the palace guards had been gossiping about it. Some of them even felt that Marianne was more loyal to that person, Hart, than to Laius. Caught off guard upon hearing this, Marianne unintentionally revealed that she had feelings for Hart. Setting aside Hart, Laius was concerned about Marianne, who was preoccupied with the strange cult group that held power within the academy. Marianne then explained that they were the Lucifera Church, a new religion disguising itself as the Magi sect in the country. Supposedly, they were highly aggressive and worshipped demons. Their influence extended far beyond the academy, having taken control of most of the country. Additionally, they had another issue. Recently, some of their members had expressed a desire to overthrow the king. Surprisingly, many nobles had joined their ranks and made significant donations. There were even rumors that their mother, the queen, had contributed to their cause as well. Laius couldn't understand what his mother was truly after. She had suddenly changed 5 years ago, and she hadn't even disclosed who had placed the necklace around his neck. Laius knew his mother was ruthless, but her aggressiveness had escalated recently. He'd even suspected that she wanted to dethrone the king. Despite sounding strange, Marianne believed that Hart could handle the situation. Unknowingly, she had placed her hopes on him. Laius felt it was too heavy a burden for Hart to bear alone. However, Marianne believed Hart had the power to stand against an organization like this. Suddenly, Laius remembered a story about the Black Knight, a defender of truth who had acted in Count Gordo's territory. Supposedly, he could defeat a dragon king. As he mentioned this, their mother, Giselot, entered the room from seemingly nowhere. Marianne attempted to greet her politely, but Giselot suddenly grabbed her by the throat. Giselot felt offended, thinking Marianne had been eyeing the necklace around her neck. Eventually, she stopped and dismissed it as a jest. Now she spoke to Laius. Giselot said she had accidentally heard about Hart attending the same school as Laius. With a menacing expression, she ordered Laius to obtain information about the Black Knight from Hart. Laius had no choice but to comply. He felt guilty for involving Hart in such a significant matter. Meanwhile, Hart had not yet departed and was still relaxing in his wooden house. Some time ago, after traveling a considerable distance from the castle, Hart returned to his wooden house in his horse-drawn carriage. Indeed, Hart had set up a teleportation door near the capital a few days ago. He wanted to relax in his wooden house until the estimated day he reached the capital. Since then, Flay had been pleading with Hart to take her along. Char tried to reassure her, saying they both had their own tasks. Then Char instructed Hart to focus on his mission in the capital. After that, Hart and Lisa went to the forest near the capital through the teleportation door. It was still quite a distance from the city gate. If he were to fly, it would surely attract attention. So, he decided to travel on foot. Not far from there, Lisa spotted a horse-drawn carriage being pursued by evil bison. These monsters were not usually found in this area. It seemed like this one had strayed from its herd. Hart could have ignored it, but it would be troublesome if Char found out. In the end, he transformed and approached the evil bison. The horse-drawn carriage hit a rock, causing one of its wheels to shatter. Hart quickly created a protective barrier to prevent the passengers from falling and getting hurt. Among the passengers was a white-haired, red-eyed girl. She said she would divert the monster's attention so that the others could escape. Feeling that the girl was strong, Hart decided to watch for a while. It turned out that the girl was losing in a power struggle against the evil bison, and she was thrown aside. Reluctantly, Hart decided to intervene, stomping on the bison's head until it passed out. The girl appeared to be in pain, so Hart didn't hesitate to heal all her wounds. The girl was deeply impressed because the healing magic she experienced felt different from the usual. A small child who had also been in the carriage was worried about the girl. She reassured the child that she was fine, thanks to the man in front of her. Hart felt like he looked suspicious in front of the child. However, fortunately, the child wasn't frightened and expressed gratitude. After that, Hart introduced himself as the Black Knight, Schwarzer, a name given to him by Char. Sometime later, Hart repaired their damaged horse-drawn carriage. The white-haired girl was deeply impressed to see her savior capable of doing so much. In reality, the girl wanted to offer money as a reward, but she had nothing with her at the moment. She had even been given a free ride by the passengers on the carriage. Hart explained that defenders of truth help selflessly. Despite being told so, the girl remained determined to repay the favor if they were to meet again. After that, Hart bid farewell to go and return the evil bison to its herd. Once again, the girl was impressed by his kindness. The monster was then taken to the forest to be fed. Subsequently, it peacefully returned to its herd. While on the way to the capital gate, Lisa appeared to be pondering something. She felt there was something odd about the girl they had encountered. Lisa didn't know how else to explain it. It seemed she would have to take a closer look to find out. Upon arriving in the capital, they headed straight to the school and were welcomed by a long queue. It didn't take long for Hart to become frustrated by the vastly different personalities of the people around him. After waiting in such a long line, Hart finally entered for the signature process. However, he had to sign a mountain of documents until he became excessively tired. Hart and Lisa were eventually able to go to their provided rooms. Lisa also had a separate room for servants. However, Hart couldn't endure it any longer and wanted to return to his wooden house. Back at the house, Char and Flay were already prepared to welcome Hart. He collapsed on the sofa and asked Flay to prepare a meal. However, Char suddenly interrupted and suggested that they dine at a restaurant in the capital. At this moment, Hart didn't really want to return to the capital. Flay immediately agreed with Hart. Furthermore, she wanted to be more useful in the hopes of changing Hart's mind about taking her along. Char then whispered something to Flay, causing her to suddenly change her mind and opt for dining at a restaurant. Hart was impressed to see Char's ability to influence Flay. Since they were heading to the capital, Hart had to use his magic to conceal Flay's ears and tail. With that, they headed to the heart of the capital. Char was very excited to see the many shops there. She spotted a restaurant and invited Hart to dine there. After finishing their meal, Char suddenly placed a map of the capital on the restaurant table. She said they needed to memorize the city's geography. Flay was assigned the southern block, Lisa the western block, while she and Hart would explore the eastern block. Hart didn't really understand why Char wanted to memorize the city's geography, but he decided to go along with Char's game. This way, Char and Hart would go exploring alone. She even called it a date. Hart panicked upon hearing that term. He tried to stay calm and assumed Char had learned the term from an anime. He was sure Char didn't know the actual meaning of the word. Nevertheless, this was Hart's first date in his entire life, and he eventually agreed to go on this date for his sweet sister. They visited several places, including a bridge, a bookstore, and an accessory stall. Char particularly liked a butterfly-shaped necklace being sold there, so without hesitation, Hart bought it for her. As the day turned into evening, Hart and Char found themselves at the town square. Char was still full of energy and ran around excitedly. Suddenly, she bumped into a girl without noticing. Unexpectedly, the girl she collided with was the white-haired girl whom Hart had saved earlier. As Hart approached, the girl felt like she had met him somewhere before. However, Hart immediately denied it, saying it was their first encounter. The girl sensed a significant amount of magical energy within him, but Hart once again refuted it, claiming his magic level was only at 2. He felt offended when she suggested he had strong magical energy. The girl eventually gave up and attributed it to exhaustion, admitting she must have misunderstood. Speaking of which, she hurriedly mentioned that she had a job interview to attend. She quickly bid farewell and left. Afterward, Char remarked that there was something mysterious about the girl. She couldn't quite explain it, but the girl seemed different from others. Hart was reminded of Lisa saying something similar. Regardless, Hart didn't want to get involved in complicated matters. He decided to keep to himself until the school entrance ceremony. Hart's clone informed the original Hart that they had to take an exam. A staff member suddenly entered the room and asked him to undergo an aptitude test before the entrance ceremony. However, Hart's clone didn't want to leave to take the test. He had been staying here for several days and was already exhausted. After some thought, the original Hart realized that this might be an opportunity to get themselves expelled. Hart would show how incapable he was during the exam. That way, he would be expelled before the school's entrance ceremony. The original Hart decided to do this quickly on his own. Afterward, Hart tried to sneak into the school building. Unfortunately, he was immediately spotted by an academic staff member at the location. The staff member even recognized Hart as the son of Count Wardo. Coincidentally, he was the one who would supervise Hart during today's exam. Once inside, Hart was surprised to see how spacious his classroom was. One class alone could accommodate around 100 students. Hart felt overwhelmed at the thought of being with so many people. He was determined to fail this exam. When he was given the exam paper, Hart intended to answer it hastily and then go home. However, when he tried to read the questions, he couldn't understand them at all. In this situation, he couldn't answer carelessly. Consequently, Hart decided to respond with "I don't know." Next, he was asked about protective magic. In Hart's mind, he thought he might be suspected if he answered "I don't know" to all the questions. So, he answered some questions based on the protective magic he commonly used. Finally, Hart was asked about ancient magic. In the past, Hart had studied as an excuse to isolate himself. He remembered reading a book written by someone with a long name. Consequently, Hart was relieved to write the correct answers based on the book he had read. Shortly after, the academic staff member took his exam paper and escorted Hart to another room to assess his magic level. Hart asserted that his magic level was only 2, so there was no need to go through with it. Nevertheless, the academic staff member said that this was the procedure required by higher-ups. When they entered a room, the academic staff called for the professor inside. Hart heard a voice but didn't see anyone in the room. The voice suddenly instructed him to look down, revealing that the professor in question was a young girl. The girl introduced herself as Tirietta Luciano, a researcher of ancient magic at the academy. Tirietta was already aware that Hart had been recommended directly by the king. However, if Hart annoyed her, she could have him expelled before the entrance ceremony. Hart immediately appeared enthusiastic upon hearing this. Tirietta was naturally puzzled by why he seemed so eager. Shortly after, the academic, Polkos, handed Hart's exam paper to Tirietta. For some reason, her expression turned serious after reading it. Tirietta also immediately asked Hart to measure his magic level. Hart thought she was angry because his answers were very hasty. When he touched the magic level measuring sphere, he already knew his magic level was 2. However, unlike usual, the magic sphere suddenly shone brightly and shattered into pieces. If he wasn't mistaken, this magic level measuring device was very valuable. Hart was certain he would be expelled for breaking it. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Tirietta was actually impressed by Hart. If the magic crystal had shattered, it was proof that Hart possessed magic energy that the crystal couldn't withstand. However, it was hard to believe given that Hart's magic level was only 2. Tirietta couldn't believe it. There were exceptions in this world. Moreover, the magic crystal was an artifact with an unknown manufacturing process. Not only that, but Hart's written exam answers were quite good. Tirietta suspected that Hart still couldn't reach the level of an emperor in magic, but she was impressed by his willingness to answer most of the questions with "I don't know." She appreciated this new way of thinking. Then, his explanation about protective magic was outstanding. Finally, his answers regarding ancient magic were also highly impressive. It was as if he had copied what Tirietta had written in her own book. Hart realized that the little girl in front of him was the author with the long name. With this, Tirietta decided to accept Hart. She didn't want any other professor to take such a promising student. However, Hart vehemently refused when Tirietta asked him to join her research class. After arriving at the dormitory, the original Hart informed his clone about everything that had happened. The day of the entrance ceremony had arrived. Before leaving, Char handed a rifle to Hart's clone. The original Hart gave him the weapon for self-defense. He had no choice but to attend the entrance ceremony. After the ceremony was over, Hart's clone immediately rushed back to his dormitory. On his way, Hart noticed a group of trendy kids. He felt he might get into trouble if he got involved with them. Hart tried to pass by them very calmly. Hart was surprised when the group's leader called someone. It turned out he wasn't calling Hart, but the girl with white hair who had briefly met the original Hart. Realizing this, Hart's clone tried to escape. Unfortunately, he ended up colliding with the girl instead. Hart only then remembered that he had met her before, and likewise, the girl hadn't expected to meet Hart at the academy. The group's leader felt offended because neither of them had shown respect when passing by. As a new student, the girl didn't know there was such a rule. However, she explained that it wasn't a school rule, but just common courtesy when encountering the student council representative, Schneidel. Suddenly, Schneidel asked Hart to explain to the girl. Hart, who knew nothing about the situation, naturally didn't want to get involved. So he pretended to have a stomachache to leave as quickly as possible. Schneidel was aware that Hart was faking it and became even more offended. Unable to control his anger, he cast a fire spell at Hart. Since Hart's clone had no magic, he tried to escape. Unfortunately, the fire spell managed to catch up with him, and Hart was immediately knocked down by it. However, thanks to the protective magic provided by the original Hart, his clone remained unharmed. Schneidel and the others were, of course, surprised to see Hart still healthy. To avoid suspicion, Hart pretended to be in pain. However, he continued to be suspected because he could still stand after being hit by the spell. Feeling greatly embarrassed, Schneidel became angry and intended to attack Hart with a continuous barrage of fire magic. This attack had the potential to harm the girl in front of him as well. Hart's clone was forced to use the rifle given to him by the original Hart. After successfully hitting Schneidel, Hart immediately ran away as fast as he could. From a distance, the sounds of Schneidel in pain could be heard. In the dormitory, Hart's clone informed the original Hart about what had happened. Out of pity, the original Hart instructed his clone to rest for the day. Outside the dormitory building, Hart was approached by a female student who handed him a challenge letter from Schneidel. Hart immediately refused it, but the girl explained that this duel was based on aristocratic etiquette. If he declined, it would bring shame to Count Gordo's name. The white-haired girl from before was secretly listening to their conversation. She felt guilty for involving Hart in this matter. The girl then asked the female student to take her to Schneidel's location. Hart could see all of this through his projection. Schneidel was currently at Marquis Hafen's residence. When they arrived in front of Schneidel, the white-haired girl asked him to cancel the duel with Hart. She felt responsible for the issue and didn't want to involve Hart. Additionally, Schneidel appeared to be injured from Hart's attack and was in no condition to duel. Schneidel was clearly not pleased with an unknown girl suddenly asking for something without apologizing. Even though the girl had now apologized, Schneidel was still unsatisfied. He then came up with the idea of making her dance naked right there. Schneidel felt that it was a small price for him not to be angry anymore. Whatever the girl was thinking, she agreed to do it. And indeed, she began by removing her pants. Now only her shirt and underwear prevented her from being completely naked. Hart couldn't understand why the girl was doing this. Just as she was about to remove her shirt, suddenly the residence plunged into complete darkness. Hart appeared as the Black Knight. He returned the girl's shirt to her and advised her to take better care of herself. After the girl put her clothes back on, Hart escorted her back to the dormitory. Afterward, he still had to deal with Schneidel. Schneidel himself was in a panic because he had suddenly found himself in the darkness. Hart immediately appeared and explained that this was a special dimension, so no one else could help him. As a punishment for his wrongdoing, Hart attached a lock to Schneidel's injured arm, courtesy of the clone's attack. If Schneidel attempted to use magic or tried to remove it, the object would only intensify the pain he felt. Reminded of this, Schneidel tried to counter with magic. As expected, he only experienced more pain before he could finish his spell. In this condition, Hart instructed him not to participate in the duel tomorrow. He would only remove the lock after Schneidel had some introspection. Not long after that, the special dimension created by Hart dissipated. Schneidel's subordinates panicked when they saw him in such pain. One of his subordinates wanted to heal him with magic, but Schneidel immediately asked them to stop. He still felt immense pain even from healing magic. Schneidel now harbored a deep grudge against the Black Knight, who had humiliated him.